Hi, everybody. My name's Tony Marcolini. Welcome to the podcast. It may interest you to know. Today, we have a very special guest joining us, a man who spent 5 decades shaping the visual world of music's biggest icons, from Elton John to Justin Timberlake to Mariah Carey to the Eagles. His creative touch has been impacted or enjoyed by millions. He's the longtime creative director, a trusted collaborator, and unconditional friend of Billy Joel, who handpicked him to assemble a team dedicated to telling Billy's story in the upcoming documentary, Billy Joel, and So It Goes. So please welcome executive producer Steve Cohen to the podcast. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you. Hi, Tony. How are you?
I'm good. Well, I'm very excited to get this opportunity to talk to you. Um, I definitely want to get into this documentary. Of course, it's coming up on HBO Max. You just appeared to, all sorts of accolades recently, when it was its initial screening. But before we talk about that, I guess I want to dig in a little bit. Um, I think your relationship with Billy Joel goes back about 50 years, does it not?
Yeah, it'll be my first show with him was in October, November of 1974. So what is that? 50, it'll be 51 years this year. So yeah, a
I
half a century. What is that? That's the weirdest thought I could possibly imagine. A half a century with this guy. It's pretty amazing.
It that is a pretty long time. As I understand, you initially got hired to I think you said a quote from you, I got hired to shine lights on this guy.
Yep. Yep, that's exactly what it was. I met him in California. I was 20, he was 25. And I started a lighting company in 1974, and we rubbed two nickels together and a couple of par cans, and I cold called all the managers on the back of the Billboard magazine that came out once a month, that had listed all of the managers and their phone numbers. Of course, this is pre-fax machine, um,
Yeah.
and the we landed two clients that day, and one of them was Billy Joel. And I only had one lighting system, and we had two bands, so I had to think fast, rent some gear at a local rental house, and show up at the almost defunct 20th Century Studios for band rehearsals. Really just sort of bullshitting my way all the way through. I mean, I had a knowledge from, theater in high school, and I was a musician, so I had a sense of timing, and but lighting was always something that I really, felt I had a feel for, and lighting for music just seemed to, be a natural for me. And I showed up, not knowing that, not really being a fan of Billy Joel. I mean, I think Piano Man had come out um, uh, probably 6 months, 8 months before, maybe a year before, and it wasn't really the kind of music that I was into. I was a California boy, so I loved
The
the
Beach
Eagles.
Boys.
I loved the Eagles. I loved Jackson Brown. I loved, and I was very much into heavy metal and prog rock. So this sort of folky, you know, folk songy kind of sea shanty song came across the radio, and I, changed the channel immediately. So I was not really into it. And then I tell this story a lot. I showed up at rehearsals with my, very primitive lighting system. And in those days, it was truly primitive. No computers, none of that stuff. They were like Volkswagen headlights with gel in front of them. I set it up, and the band sat down, and Billy sat down, and they started rehearsing this song called "The Ballad of Billy the Kid." And I was blown away. Like, I had no idea that this huge symphonic cinematic sound would come, from this guy. It triggered all of the emotions that I got from the music that I loved, and I went, this is not Piano Man. This is something completely different. And as I heard this music, I started to realize that Piano Man was one thing, but Billy Joel's Billy Joel's catalog, or at that time, the songs he was doing were layered and had such incredible variety and truly cinematic in that they gave me a great material to be able to light. And once again, with 25 or 30 lights in these little, field houses and high school gymnasiums and small theaters, we started to, make some magic together. So that's really the kind of origin story. I did the first show, and after the show, uh, I got picked up by the sound engineer who hired me, convinced I'm getting fired because Billy walked off stage pissed off, and I'm getting fired. Billy wants to see you. I'm like, okay, well, at least he's going to fire me in person. And, I get driven to this Holiday Inn. They're sitting around the pool, one of those Holiday Inns that had a courtyard. And he poured me a drink, and he said, well, it's interesting, Steve. It's like it's the same band, it's the same set list, it's the same song order, but something happened tonight that never happened before, and we got applause and reaction in places that we never got. And by process of elimination, we figured, it had to be the lighting. So welcome aboard. And I never looked back. I moved to New York about 6, 8 months later and went to work in the office, became a production manager, because I was there and I knew a little bit about logistics, and we were sort of, that classic movie of, hey, let's put on a show. Like, I can do the costumes, I'll do the lights, I'll do we were we were a little bit more sophisticated than that, but it felt that way. It felt like we were all in the trenches trying to, make something happen. And at the time, Billy had some success with Piano Man, but it was a slow, slow slog. That really the only thing that was consistent for us was that we showed up and we played venues and we worked our asses off, and we're on the road, basically, 8 months a year, playing every place we could. We played every college in New Jersey, every college in Pennsylvania, and twice, and we would come back. And this sort of kinetic energy happened, and he started to build a fan base that was propelling us without the record success, and one of the things you'll learn in the documentary is, how very close it was to being dropped by the label, how very close he was being dropped by the label, because he wasn't getting that kind of, hit record success. But we were hitting it on the road, and we were, increasing the venue sizes, a couple of hundred more this time and a couple of hundred more that time, and it really became, this performance thing that sustained us. And I was part of all of that from the growth. We would talk about it.
It's, I mean, it's honestly amazing. I think when I think of the early days, as a fan of Billy Joel's, from I want to say the start, and the music stood out, right? It stands out what he writes because it's not just love songs, right? And it's not. It just he tells a story with every single song that he writes, and the one thing they say, the purpose, the purpose of writing is like to help the reader, the audience emote, certainly with poetry. And I think he does that, right? He elicits something inside of, I think, everybody, when they hear a song from him, you can connect in a way. I think,
Right.
it resonates with you. And I think that's probably why you had such success with the audience, right? Because you kind of reach right into people and you're like, wow, I had that similar experience. So, I mean, I watching his career continue to grow with a front row seat had to be amazing. Uh,
Oh yeah, I was not quite front row in the middle of the house, but yes, it was. Yeah, definitely. We really didn't have time to analyze it. We were just doing it, and we would learn from our mistakes. And I think what you talk about with this resonance, this relatability of his music, I think everybody in the audience, the core fans felt that they were those people that he would sing about. And
Mhm.
identification is the key to relating to that. And that was because he doesn't write in metaphor. He doesn't they're not really sort of high poetic, sort of impressionistic stuff. I mean, he writes the way we talk. He writes the way we think. And I think in a lot of cases, his critical the bumps that the critics, did over the years was because, he didn't, he wasn't arty. He was just like straightforward and talking. And, now when you listen to these songs and I've had the opportunity to really live with these things for 50 years, like you realize that there's incredible depth in his poetry, but it's served up in a very palatable way, in a melody that you can remember, and in an imagery that you've seen in your life experience. And that's why I think it's lasted.
So now you just won an Emmy Award, right, for Billy Joel, the 100th live at Madison Square Garden.
Won three, actually. The show won three.
Oh, okay, three. Well, congratulations. I'm gonna ask two questions on that. One, what did it feel like when they called your name?
Hmm. Um, I don't know. I never thought I never thought that I would win an award, especially an Emmy Award for this craft, because I'm not a lighting designer in television per se. I'm a live lighting designer, so it narrows the amount of shows that can be nominated. And I sort of thought, that was one ring I was never going to be able to grab. And so I think there was this. I was really proud of that show because I was able to produce it, which allowed me to spend money in places where I could really guarantee that visually that show would be captured the way a fan felt it. So I felt that really kind of surreal moment. Like they all say, it's like, holy shit, I really won this thing. And the other person who won was Brian Ruggles, who is my best friend, who hired me, who's Billy's live sound producer. So, and they used to nickname us, Dr. Sound and Dr. Lights. So to see him go up and win and me go up and win, we were just sort of like, okay, finally, you guys acknowledge what we've been working for. And really, that's what it is. It's acknowledgement from your peers that, hey, we think you guys did a really great job, so we're going to give this to you. Because it's not a massive, you're only voted for by your peers. So I think that was great. Yeah, it was amazing. Are you kidding me? Like,
Right.
in my I couldn't button my tuxedo, so like I walked up and my tuxedo was open. It was like all the stuff you hear about. But it does
That's the stuff dreams are made of,
yeah,
right?
but it doesn't go away. It's so funny. It's like the next day I woke up and it still felt as special. And I have the award sitting on my desk and I look at it and it means a lot. It's an acknowledgement from the people that I work with in this business, and it was able to give everybody else involved in that show the props that they needed, because I couldn't have won it without all of them, and them being recognized, it just made it all feel good. It's a very Billy Joel-esque kind of way. Like one of the things I always talk about with Billy is that he taught me a work ethic. And the work ethic he taught me how he got this, I don't know, very young, but in his 20s. And he'd always say, Steve, you show up, you do the best you can. If you're going to be a bus driver, be the best fucking bus driver you can be. And like, just show up. And when you screw up, admit you screwed up and move on, and don't concentrate on the results. He used to say to me that it's not for you to call yourself an artist. Let other people call you an artist. I'm a worker amongst workers, and it's not false humility. It is a north star of creativity for me, because then I just concentrate on the craft. I don't concentrate on the awards. I don't concentrate on the recognition. I don't do things for that. I do things because I love what I do, and I want to be the best to myself. And if everybody likes it, it's like, that's frosting on the cake.
So can you remember then his first concert at Madison Square Garden?
Oh yeah, I remember the first Madison Square Garden show. Sure. I mean, that was we had played 3 nights at Carnegie Hall,
Wow.
just about at the end of his um it was a very rough time. And I think, they had made the decision between him, his agent, his wife and manager at the time that, we needed to make something special in New York. And 3 nights, the promoter never believed. Ron Delsner said, "Oh, you'll never sell out 3 nights." It sold out immediately. So that was a moment when he realized that New York City was really wrapped their arms around him. And then Just the Way You Are came out,
Mm,
uh,
my
and
favorite.
and the rest is history. And we put 2 nights. I think it was 2 nights up at Madison Square Garden, and I remember it because Billy was in like peak form, thin, wiry boxer stance, and he just kicked it. And we, the thing about the garden is, it's built on springs. So when the audience jumps up and down in unison, the whole building moves. And I remember him doing Only the Good Die Young, and it still happens, the last time we did the runs, but he did Only the Good Die Young, and the building was jumping up and down, and we're like, oh, this is a thing. So I think it's one of the most perfect combinations. Billy Joel at Madison Square Garden, it's like pasta bolognese, it together. So
Sure. I mean, there has to be a bit of nostalgia, when he goes back and plays now, right? To connect you. I mean, I'm always interested in that, like two moments that can kind of connect each other,
yeah.
right? So like, you remember that first moment and like now it may be lost a little of that specialness, right? Because you're so used to playing there, but um, you
Well,
know,
listen, I mean, we wrapped up that run. We did 105 shows. We did 150 shows, uh, lifetime.
yeah.
I was at 149 of them because I had COVID for one of those
Mhm.
shows. And Billy's taking time off. So who knows, I sit back and go like, if there's a gig that I would love to go back and play, imagining the house lights going out at Madison Square Garden after the documentary comes out and after he's recovered from his stuff, and the triumphant return. Like it's one of those things like I dream about winning the lottery, and I dream about back to Madison Square Garden. So I'm hoping we'll be able to do that again.
So let's talk a little bit about this documentary, right? I mean, so you're 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 tasked with, something insurmountable, right? It's sort of like looking up at the Matterhorn.
Yeah.
And tell me about the creative process, right? In sort of taking all this material and having to shape it kind of cohesively and emotionally into this narrative um, that would tell his story, his very unique personal story. What's the creative process to do that
Well,
for you?
for me, as my role as creative director and then executive producer of this film, um, the story was not a story for me to tell. First of all, it was not a story for Billy to tell. Billy was like, "I'm not telling my own story. I tell it. My life is in my songs. Uh, it's not for me to tell. If someone else wants to do it, then they can do it." And I have to say that the process, was a long road to get here because, as sort of the gatekeeper for television and film projects, like, I'll see them and sort of sift through them, and then if something's interesting, I'll run it past him, and then he'll decide, yeah, maybe we should develop this, or maybe we should get some more information. The documentary thing was like there was a lot of people before Susan Lacy that had ideas about a documentary, and he was just like, I'm not. We're in the middle of the garden run. I don't get it. I don't feel like there's any reason to do it. Um, so how this came about, my whole idea about it, or the experience to me, was sort of like, this carousel of music. Like there were all kinds of signs pointing to this. So first of all, Susan Lacy had approached me about a year before. She lives in Sag Harbor. I live in East Hampton, so we are neighbors. And Susan Lacy, for those who don't know, started this incredible program called American Masters at PBS. She produced, I don't know, I always get this wrong, 50 or 60 films for American Masters over 30 years. And they were, documentaries about artists. So she established that. She left American Masters. She then went to HBO, got an overall deal, and produced documentaries and directed documentaries for HBO. So, and she was a Long Islander. So she reached out. So we sat down. We had this lovely 3-hour lunch. She got to know me. She knew my relationship with Billy. She always wanted to make a film about Billy Joel, but she didn't really know a lot about Billy. Like she knew Billy, the top line Billy, but didn't really know. And as we started to communicate, she found out, well, he's classically trained, and he's a Holocaust survivor. And so all of a sudden, Susan had these things that she related to Billy with, because she's comes from a classical music family. She's also a her family's a Holocaust survivor. So it was very interesting. So she said, well, we should do this. And I went back, and Billy says, yeah, but I don't want to make a film. So it was like, fine, okay, nice meeting. If we ever do this, we'll have a conversation. A year later, I get approached by another producer who we've been talking about a couple of other things, and he handed me a one sheet. And out of a conversation with Billy, I said, hey, so here's an interesting idea. They want to make a documentary. And he goes, all right, like change, So I liken it to like the music, you play musical chairs and the music stops and boom, you won. About a week later, and this is Todd Milner and Sean Hayes, they're friends of Billy's, are friends of mine. About a week later, Todd calls me up and says, hey, would you be interested to, if Tom Hanks and Gary Getzman come on board? And I went, oh, I don't know. Let me think about that for a moment.
Hmm.
Let me think about that. I said, well, yeah, do they
Yeah.
want to do this? He said, well, they very much like to do this, and they have an idea on who they would want as a director, and she's a woman. I said, wait a minute. Don't tell me, let me guess. Susan Lacy. And Susan Lacy has an overall deal with HBO. So you have to understand that the idea of a Billy Joel documentary, not only making the documentary, but having it on HBO, which has a high critical bar, suddenly now this becomes something that's really sort of what we want to do. So come back to Bill. Bill meets Susan, and Susan says, if I do this film, it has to be a completely independent film, because the only way I can tell an artist story is to be able to tell the artist story as I see it. And Billy said to her, I don't really care about anything as long as you're honest. And afterwards, I said, Bill, you realize we have no editorial, we have no editorial comments about this. I mean, she's obviously not going to do anything that's going to upset you. We know she's not a tabloid director. She's a friend of artists, but we got nothing to say about it. He says, I'm fine with it. He said, let's see what she figures out. So she has a producer named Jessica Levin. So here's Susan Lacy, who's got this incredible overview and respect for the artist, but she doesn't really know the depths of what's going on. And her producer, Jessica Levin, knows almost more about Billy Joel than I do, right? Super fan. So as they start working together with me, and we start collating gear, equipment, and we start collating information. I start, uncovering archive stuff for them and pointing them in the right direction so we can find certain things. It becomes apparent that the two of them need to make the film together. So Susan makes Jessica her co-director, and now I'm looking at the perfect combination to be able to tell the story. Someone who understands the length and breadth of the music, and someone who understands the struggle of an artist and how the artist's life experience ties into their ability to, do what they do. My job throughout was to provide the depth of information from the archives of my life experiences. You got to remember, this is my story too. I mean, I started with Billy, he's got a 58-year career. So 8 years into his career, after his high school bands, I'm there. So I experienced a lot of the things that with him not of course personally deeply, but the ancillary things that happen throughout that relationship. The nature. Look, he used to write songs. We'd go over and he'd play songs on the piano and hand you his handwritten lyrics so you could follow along. Like we were there when all of this stuff happened because he worked in this total collaborative environment. Once he got himself, his head
Like the
above water.
team, the kind of the team that he felt
Yeah, and I
comfortable
mean,
with.
he would work very solo, very all by himself, and then as soon as he would do it, he would run it past his guys because if his guys liked it, then it was like okay. So I was there throughout all of this. So my job in all of this was to be a facilitator, but also to point out things that only I knew that they wouldn't have known, that weren't in the press, that wasn't in the tabloids, that wasn't in the bios, like things that happened behind the things that happened. And look, I have opinions. When I saw cuts, I would give my opinion about certain things. And one of the greatest gifts that these two women did for me was that they listened to my opinions, understanding that, where I was coming from, I had to make a decent case for anything, but we had to make sure that this was an independent story, that it wasn't a 5-hour commercial for this guy's career. And we accomplished that 100% because at the end of the day, if you look at this, it is truly, I mean, there's some stuff there that's uncomfortable to watch that I know has got to be uncomfortable for Billy to watch. Um, but he said, look, Susan, you've got to be honest. I'll tell you another thing that's interesting about this. When we started the process, Billy was like, great, I don't have to do any interviews. I got so much archives out there. You could build my story with archives and you could build my story with all that other stuff. And Susan was like, yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I got to sit down and I've got to talk to you and I've got to see your observation of these events from where you sit today. And Billy
Mm.
was like super reluctant, but he like, he said okay because he's a pro. And when he straps on the Billy Joel, like he's an entertainer even when he's doing his interviews. And we were supposed to do 3 or 4. She got him to sit down 6 or 7 times and really got him to go deep, really got him to even he said when he got up from one of the interviews, he said, boy, Susan, you really get me to go deep. And this is a man who hasn't talked about any of this stuff. So
Wow.
so I think what the fan gets out of this film is a super honest story. But I'll tell you the other part of this that I think is the real gift. Billy spent his entire career deflecting meaning. In other words, he hated music videos because he wanted you to have an imagination of what the music was. He didn't want to put a visual in front of you. Same thing with the writing of these songs. He never really told everybody thought that this song was about him and this song was about this one and this song was about that one. And he deflected all of this stuff. Sometimes he would talk a little bit about it. So
Or even like his newest one, right? His
yeah,
latest one,
yeah.
everyone wants to know.
You take from this whatever you want. I'm going to give it to you. You take it. So now fast forward 50 years. Um, he's peeled back the hood. Like now you see inside the engine and he's talking about these things, the relationships and the things that motivated these songs. So for a fan, if you've had a particular thought about the song Stiletto for 40 some odd years, and you hear the backstory about the song Stiletto now, the real one, now you go back in and listen to this song with a completely different attitude. So it's almost like he's given us the opportunity to rediscover these songs with new backstories, with new subtext. And I just think that as much as I think Billy is clever like a fox, whatever they say, dumb like a fox. I don't even think he knows that that's what he's done. But I've had people come up and tell me like, I see Big Shot, I see You May Be Right in a totally different light now that I've seen the film and I hear the backstory of that particular song. So I think that's one of the gifts of this film to the Billy Joel fan and to the people who aren't Billy Joel fans. It just shows you, the depth of experience behind this guy's writing.
I love that. I think that his career is truly the testament, right, to hard work.
Yeah.
Like you said, he didn't fall right into success. He wasn't just, handled, by managers and came right into like a big pop song that thrust him into the spotlight. And I'm not diminishing that. I know that happens, but he worked really hard. Like he went out every day and he earned it in little pieces, along the way.
Yeah.
That's a much harder journey.
Yeah.
But it shows how much he loved being creative, how much he loved uh, the process, right? I remember talking to my dentist once, and he said, I never wanted to be anything but a dentist, right?
Right.
So it was easy. He was like 80 years old. He was still being a dentist because he felt so passionate about it.
Yeah.
And it sort of reminds me of the same thing. When I think of Billy Joel, I couldn't imagine him being something else,
Well,
right?
I mean, he's always said that if you had any other career, he'd be a teacher and probably a history teacher. And like he is, there, forget about the songs specifically that are, historically based, but he's a teacher. He teaches us about ourselves. He teaches us about life experiences. So, in some way that's his lot in life. But at the end of the day, he's a rock and roll piano player who wishes he was Beethoven. And, the struggle between not being Beethoven and not being satisfied by not being Beethoven, and at the same time working really hard to communicate those kind of emotions, like that's been his life force. And, it's tough, but we're all pretty lucky that he decided to do this because we get all of that great work. I mean, he's got 100 and I don't know, 190 songs. It's a finite catalog. We're not going to get, he's not going back in and writing, 11, 12, 13 new songs every year. That's not, he stopped in the late 90s. And, as much as we all would love to hear his observations of today's
Yeah.
political climate in a lyric, ah, I don't think I got enough money to lose that bet because it ain't gonna happen. But I think that one of the joys of making this film for me is as much as I knew this story, I never saw the story from 30,000 feet
The
and
aerial view.
the aerial view. And um, we all hope, I hope everyone who's a creative person gets to experience that feeling because not very many of us get to look at our life from that distance. And a lot of the things that I learned in making this film were not surprising to me. They were illuminating, but they weren't surprising to me. Like when we were playing, when we went down to Australia during the Stormfront tour, Billy had a huge financial struggle with his ex-manager. He had to finance the recording of Stormfront on his credit card. Like it was tough, yet again, after having all of this success. And we went out on the road to make the money back. He went on the road to make the money back, something he really didn't want to do. He couldn't spend time with his daughter. He couldn't spend time with his wife. He couldn't spend time on Long Island, which he loved. We just had to work. And all I remember is we turned those 2 years into this intense, relentless workforce where we were doing these shows and we were playing in front of these audiences and they were loving it and we were loving it and we did not stop. And at the end, we were all exhausted, but the accomplishment I think we finished Yankee Stadium and that was sort of the end of that particular era. It was like, we looked at each other and went, wow, this is some amazing shit. Like who gets to do this stuff?
Yeah.
Who gets to do this stuff? So, very, very lucky, very blessed.
You got to work with Tom Hanks too, I guess, in making this, right? Sean Hayes, Tom Hanks. I think they're
Right.
both credited.
Yeah. Sean Hayes and Tom were credited. Todd Milner, who was Sean's partner, was really hands-on. Gary Getzman, who is Tom's partner, was really hands-on. Gary and I, and Gary's made some amazing films with Tom and amazing series. And it's been really interesting because they sort of I learned a lot from them in how to not say things, but when you say something, it really lands. Like Gary and I would have a conversation at the end of a month, not even talking to each other, and he'd point something out to me, and I'd be like, "Oh, right," and not thinking the impact of that. I mean, that's why these guys do what they do. So, but I'll tell you, the experience of working with Pentimento, working with Susan Lacy and Jessica Levin, and the two editors that were relentless, and I mean, really creative, not relentless. They were really creative. We had two incredible archivists that found stuff that I didn't even knew existed. We were able to pull in. I always thought that there was like 30 or 40 pieces of film, and we ended up uncovering thousands of pieces of recorded stuff. So
There's a lot of never before stuff, as I understand,
a
going into this.
lot of never
Yeah.
before stuff. Yep, for sure.
Do you remember sitting down the first time you got to see it in its entirety put together?
Yeah.
What's that moment like?
I cried. I just cried. Like I saw the first because it hadn't been cut up into pieces yet. And I think the first cut was of part one was about 2 hours. Yeah, about 2 hours. And because you don't know the shape it's going to take. Like I didn't see anything.
Right.
I saw a couple of segments. Um, they showed me a couple of segments. I saw a little bit of the open, which really never changed from the first time we laid it out. But I never knew the shape it was going to take. And I didn't know how linear she was going to tell the story. So I was literally blown back in my seat. And what's interesting about this is I've seen the film 100 times. Gets me every time. I know what's coming around the corner, and it gets me. I know what's coming around the corner, and it gets me. So I'm it's kind of weird because I can't wait for it to like go out in the world and see if everybody reacts the same way, because it's pretty remarkable because it's funny, it's dramatic, it's sensitive, it's emotional, and it's vulnerable, and yet it's about a pop star. So it's like, what? Like I know how important Billy Joel is to the world. I know how important his songs are and will be for hopefully hundreds of years from now. But you know, I I don't know if you're going to see it, if you're going to get it. And I think this film really captures that, because you really get to know that you get to see how a guy can take his life experiences and turn it into art right in front of your eyes.
Mm.
And that to me is genius filmmaking. I don't, if you can do that, you've won. Billy said after he saw it, he said he learned some things about himself that he never even saw. So
Oh,
that's
I love that.
yeah. So I think it's a testament to Susan and to Jessica, two entirely different mindsets that came together on this. Um,
Well, I think the best of art that goes out there, especially in this genre, right? Filmmaking, it relies upon the collaborative,
yeah,
right? So, I mean, it can't even for fiction. I mean, you need the writer writes the story, but somebody else weaves you through the visual,
yeah,
right? And there's so many people, the actor that breathes life into a character, and I mean, in this case, again, it may not be fiction, but you're still making choices, important creative choices that weave you through a visual story of somebody's life. And it's not that easy to get that right, right? Because we all have different moments, right? We have poignant moments and moments of great joy, and moments where we hit a home run, where we feel very creative, that we've nailed it, and then discouragement, right? Moments where we feel like I can't get this right, it's driving me crazy, and then it mixes with our personal life. We all have our professional life and then our personal life, and you're trying to balance all that. And to think that you could tell a story of anybody's life in a couple of hours and really capture the essence. I mean, you're certainly not going to be able to capture somebody's entire experience, but you want to walk away with the essence, right? What was this? What was their tale about? What
Yeah.
did they believe in? What were their highs and lows? What made them tick? What resonated for them, even if it wasn't the same thing that resonated for other people. I think that's a really daunting task. And especially to undertake it for somebody that's lived at such an upper echelon kind of level in life, that most people would look at this and say, the struggling musicians are going to look at that and say, he's lived the dream, right? I mean, he's reached a kind of success that a lot of other musicians will never have.
Right.
So they're going to look up to that in a way that thinks that makes them feel like it's all just, rainbows and butterflies. But the reality is he struggled like everybody else, right? He had problems like everybody else. He wasn't always, I'm sure there were days that he woke up that he didn't feel like Billy Joel behind the piano, right? That he just couldn't get it right, what he was trying to capture. And that's the human condition. And I think to get that and say, look, this is somebody who rose to the top. This is somebody who succeeded through hard work and showing up, as he said, every day. But it's more about the tenacity of, believing in yourself and believing you want something and getting up every day and just going back out there and doing the best that you can. And tenacity, can move your professional life along. And all of us have to get through our personal lives simultaneous. And I think to tell that story in a way that you walk away feeling the essence of that person and feeling their journey and their struggle, that's a victory. So it opens up at the Tribeca Film Festival, but there's been like a bunch of reviews for
Yeah.
this about just getting it right, nailing this.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, you know, it's two parts. It's
I think
five
just part
hours.
one opened, right? Did you
Well,
just
just
show
part
part
one
one?
played, and so when it drops on HBO, there'll be two parts. It's about 5 hours. But you brought up something that's really interesting, and you know, if we're talking to people now that are, when you say it's a daunting task, so there's a North Star in the making of this film that I think in all of these processes, when you try and make something, you have to find a North Star to hold on to. And if you can discipline yourself to not deviate from that, then the story unfolds the way the story unfolds. And I think what Susan and Jessica did was it always came back to the music. Anything in the story that did not serve the music
Yeah,
and the songs was eventually on the cutting room floor. And what ended up happening is, as Billy's life is lived through his music, as long as those dots got connected somehow, then the honesty of his life's experience float to the surface, and you understand them immediately. But you don't just understand them, you feel them with him. And
yeah,
that to me is the X factor and why I think this film works, because they never varied from that. They never took their eye off of that ball. And sometimes we would have arguments about it, and it was like anytime I had a note, it'd be like, is it serving the music? Like, and I learned that from them, because that was Susan's initial thing from the beginning. It, like, if it doesn't serve the art, and she learned that from years and years at American Masters, that if you're telling Frank Lloyd Wright's story, you tell it through his buildings. And
sure.
if you cannot go back to the building with any part of his story, then that piece isn't relevant to the story. And I think a great part of the problem with music documentaries these days is most of them are paid advertising. So when you get a chunk of money to tell your story from Netflix or from wherever, and you tell the story through your eyes as the artist, I think that the the audience gets cheated a little bit, because they get your version of your life this way. And I'm not saying anything against those films, because I think some of them are incredibly entertaining and some of them are really, really good. But almost all of them lack vulnerability.
Yes.
And if they have vulnerability, it's staged vulnerability to me. It's sort of like dramatic moments that are sort of staged because we'll amplify this particular thing because it does something. And I think that's once again Billy's instinct to say yes to a project like this. It's like if you're going to tell the story, it's warts and all, guys. There's nothing. And I'm telling you, there are moments in this film where I looked at it, especially in part two, and my heart like was so heavy because he's my friend. And I mean, I played it. I part. It's very poignant memory to me because we got to the place where we locked picture and the film was pretty much done with a few changes. And he was very great about it. He kept saying, "You show it to me when you're ready to show it, Steve." Um, and I had showed him an very early cut of part one, and he liked it. But it was about 7, 8 months later, and he came over to my house, and we sat on the couch and we watched the film together for 2.5 hours with a break, and then 2.5 hours. And I sat there and he was sitting next to me, and I tried really hard not to look at him at places where I knew these places were really emotional to me. But I'd catch a glimpse out of him, and he was riveted, almost like separated from himself. But there were places where I was hurting for him.
Yeah.
And you know what? I shouldn't have been, because he was like, whatever. Like I lived a Shakespearean life. What do you want from me? There was, or I'm sure there's a part of him that he's full of regrets and he talks about it. He's made mistakes. And, in the opening part of the film, he says, a great chef told him it's all about how you recover from your mistakes. And I think that that's his through line in his life. So you're going to get, when you see the film, you're going to get the true, as true a story as you can. As much as I can say it's 100% true, there's always somebody else's version of something that happened. Well, I was there and I saw it differently, and I was there and I saw it differently. And, there's always going to be that, that
Perception.
he said, she said the truth. But having been there, it's about as true. It's about as true as you're going to ever get. And that's because we had no, we had no hands in the mix.
So you're with him the first time he watches it. I didn't realize that. So the very first time he sees it, you're sitting next to him.
Mhm.
Did he like it?
Yeah. Yeah. He
Yeah.
said, he said at the end of part two, he said, wow, he said, this is cinematic. This is really cinematic. This is a real movie. Like, I don't think he even put two and two together that it was like a real, you know, it's a documentary. Is it VH1 behind the music? It's like, wow, he was very impressed. And he was very impressed with how Susan told his ancestor story, and talked about his father and how she utilized his comments about, his childhood growing up. And he was moved. He was definitely moved. And then, after a couple of days, he would send me an email saying, I thought about this, or I thought about that. So it was, it affected him, and it affected him well. He didn't freak out.
Right. So when he comes back after a lot of years, to turn the lights back on.
Mhm.
He's sort of uh I mean, I've heard little bits and pieces of that story. Does he tell any of that in the movie?
It's not, that story is not in the film. The film really ends at the end of the Madison Square Garden run.
Ah,
I
nice.
think the Turn the Lights Back On story is for another day. It's a great story.
Right,
It's more Freddie Wexler's story than it is really a Billy Joel story.
right.
Think Freddie, I hope Freddie tells it. I hope Freddie gets to be able to tell it with all its glory. I was there when it all happened, so it is truly it's truly sort of a feat, like a miracle. It's a movie all to itself. Um, but yeah, so I think that's for a story for another day.
Wow. Well, I mean, I'm very anxious to see it. I'm going to be tuning in to HBO, both
Great.
parts. I've been a longtime fan of Billy Joel, so I'm anxious to see it this new lens.
Yeah.
because I do think there's a lot of things out there, and uh, maybe other people's perspectives occasionally. And I think there's been good and bad, or very tunnel visioned things. But I mean, to really get that aerial view, as you talk about, I'm anxious to see it, because I think he's been such an impactful creator
Yeah.
across decades, that how can you not want to go back and say, let's talk about what makes this person tick and how they got to where they were. And, and the fact that this kind of coalesce around this unified vision, to make this happen. I'm anxious to see it. I'm
Yeah,
excited.
and I think I think there are a handful of people in the world that are in the Billy Joel strata. I mean, we can name them with one hand, and I think at this point in their lives, they're septuagenarians. They are still creating, however they're still creating, but the heyday of when they made those big impacts are, 30, 40, 50 years behind us. And I think in Billy's case, he, with the exception of the Christie Brinkley era where it seemed like he was plastered all over the front pages of the tabloids, which he was, there's a lot in this film that you just never heard. The entire first half of the film, the entire part one, talks about his relationship to his first wife, Elizabeth, from the beginning of their romance, from the beginning of the first record he wrote, Cold Spring Harbor, and the evolution of her to become his manager. And throughout that whole period of the three big records, Stranger, 52nd Street, Glass Houses, that story has never been told. So that you're gonna have context about that part of his career that you've never heard. And then the second part too, where you learn about his family of origin, and you learn about his father, and you learn about his family being, killed in Auschwitz, and his classical, his why classical music is such an important part of his composition. That also hasn't been told. So I think out of all of the artists, the handful of artists, he probably has the most gray area of lack of information to the public. So, if we've been able to do anything, if Susan and Jessica have been able to do anything, is be able to tell new stories about someone we know every song they've ever written. So, I mean, hopefully we've done our job and everybody walks away going, wow, that's amazing. Hopefully there's no, oh yeah, who cares about that stuff? And I don't think it's possible. I don't think you can see this movie without having a strong visceral reaction, because it's all in the music. It's all there in the music.
So when is it premiering?
The 18th of July, part one drops, and then the way HBO Max does it is like it will drop simultaneously on HBO and HBO Max. So you'll be able to stream part one, and then the following Friday, the 25th of July, part two drops. And then after that, they're both going to be available.
I'm anxious to see it. I
Can't
hope
wait for you to see it.
I hope that you'll come back, because you've had a great career working for a number of different artists. I mean, I focused on this particular, you executive producing this movie, and your the context of your professional life connected to Billy Joel. But you've also worked for a number of the high end artists, the definitely. And I'd love to come back and hear some other stories. And I didn't want to deviate today, but I invite you back. I hope you'll
I'd
come
be
back.
happy to come back. I mean, I love talking about this stuff. And, I'm at that place. I'm just turned 70. I'm gonna just turn 71 in a week, and I'm reflecting on my life and career. I have kind of a second act now because I'm producing television. I'm doing a couple of scripted things that I'm in develop. I mean, it's a whole new world for me. This rock and roll, touring, producing rock shows have sort of delivered me into a new arena. And what I'm finding is that experience is really well suited in producing narrative television, scripted as well as documentary stuff, because I come from a place of like, I can't screw around. Like when you're doing live shit, you got deadlines and budgets. And, although now it's a little bit different, they're not spending like they used to, but I'm finding that my take on how to tell a story is unique to a lot of these fellow producers that I've been working with. So there's a lot of stuff that I'm having fun with, and a lot of that comes from all of that experience from the NSYNCs and the Britney Spearses and the Mariah Careys and those kind of things. So yes, I'd be happy to come back and talk to you.
And you have a number, I should say, you have a number of projects in development with Amazon Studios and I think MGM, the History Channel.
Yes.
You have
Yeah.
a number, you have a lot of balls in the air.
I have two books. A very good friend of mine, who I've known for 40 years, has given me the rights on two of his novels. This gentleman named Simon Gall, and they're both historical fiction and developing. I got a writing, and I mean, the whole development process is interesting because it's very long and arduous. And once again, I'm very impatient, but you judge your wins a little differently. It's like you get a writer attached, and that's a win. You get a studio attached, and that's a win. So I'm still looking forward to sitting in the chair and having my name on the back of the chair, but it's all fun for me, and it goes back to the thing I said at the beginning. Show up, do the best you can, leave the results up to the universe, and you're going to be a happy guy. And I love what I do, so it's not work.
It shows.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, it was an honor to get this opportunity to talk to you. I will chase you down to bring you back.
Absolutely. Anytime you want. I love it. Thank you very much. It was a
Thank
great
you.
conversation. I think your observations are spot on. So I can't wait. When this thing gets ready to be heard, I can't wait to put it on a long drive and listen to you. So that'd be great.
I'm going to close it out. I'm going to send nothing but good wishes and positive thoughts for the premiere of his upcoming movie. And I'll put a link to the extent that I can, and he'll be back. Thanks for joining us.
Can't wait to come back. Thank you, Tony.